Welcome to Exploring Axon, a podcast where we discuss Axon Framework, Axon Server, and their ecosystem. I am your host and the producer of this podcast, Sara. My guest today is Laurent Toulon from the company Locala. Laurent is a software engineer and architect who has been working with event sourcing for the past 5 years and has gained some great insights in the process. He shared his experiences of designing systems and applications through the processes of event modeling, communication with the business side, and more. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and let's have a listen. Hi, Laurent. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing some amazing information and some of your experiences with me. So before we get to one of my favorite topics, which is going to be the topic of today, tell everybody about yourself, where you are, what you do, a little bit about your background if you like. So the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Sara. Well, thank you for having me. So my name is Laurent. I'm an engineer, let's say, most classical one.
Okay.
I have like a bit over, I don't know. Oh, it's been a while actually. 15 years of experience now.
Very good. Okay. So we can say you're a seasoned engineer. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a seasoned engineer. And yeah, I've been working on very different things now since I started. I started as a PHP developer, working mostly on web applications, and I changed company and once. Like I changed once company, and now I'm still in the same company.
Very good.
And but the tasks I've been working on are very different because well, I'm not working on PHP anymore. I'm working mostly with JVM technologies, mostly Java, but more and more Kotlin.
Okay, nice.
And yeah, in 2017, I started working with let's say my favorite technology nowadays, which is event sourcing
Awesome.
and everything that is around it.
Very good.
So yeah, and I'm working in a company named Locala. So it's a company that is based. Well, it has its HQ in Paris, but we are a lot also in the US. And I personally am in the south of France,
Awesome.
in let's say another office of the company.
Very
But we
good.
are really all around the world.
Nice. Yeah. So kind of similar to how we are in Axon. We're kind of spread out, which is cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you for the introduction. So the topic that I'm really usually drawn to is the topic of event modeling and the architecture of a system. So, or systems sometimes. So we're going to focus on that today a little bit, and we will, of course, talk about event source systems for clarity here. So let's maybe start with the discovery mode, because a lot of times when folks start talking about, hey, let's maybe give a system sort of an upgraded version of itself, or maybe start a new system or start a new application, a lot of times that's the main big question mark. Where do we begin? How do we start it? How do we model it? And what is the architecture going to be like? So kind of walk me through your process a little bit. Do you start with answering the question of, hey, what are we thinking about the architecture of the system? Or do you think about, let's go ahead into full force event modeling session and then see what we get out of it and then go from there? So what would be your first step?
Well, I
Or
would say,
steps, rather.
yeah, I would say neither of those.
Awesome. Great. I like that answer. So then give me your first step.
Well, first step is understanding the needs, the
Of course.
business needs,
Yeah.
and I think that's the most important step, is to make sure that everyone is aligned on where we want to go, what we want to do. And so to do so, there is, well, first a lot of talking, exchanging information, asking questions, and then indeed we can move on to, let's say, the designing part, So either we're working on something we already know and we have already done some work on this. So generally there is a part where we're going to study what is currently existing. But if we're working on something completely new, well, depending on where it's going to be integrated, we are going to do some kind of design session where we are going to first have a global overview. Well, I'm going to talk from a technical perspective here because that's the part that I'm in charge of. But yeah, we're going to work on a global overview of the architecture, see how we see the various applications slash domains interact with each other. So we are going to start defining these. And the first thing that we are going to present to the team is really um, an architectural model of the various applications interacting with each other and pointing in there the various responsibilities of each part. And so deducing the domains from these. And all this is based on the business information that we are going to get in the talking sessions before that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because everything basically depends on the domain, right? The problem at hand, which is usually is a business problem. There's times that it is a technical problem. You figure it out on the technical side, but when it comes to designing a system, a lot of times you're trying to figure out the answers to some kind of business question, right? And then you involve them to find out what's the best way to approach. So that's really great that you mentioned that. So once you have then decided on the architecture of your systems, and then from then, I'm assuming you kind of go into the groups that are going to take care of each aspect of this bigger system or systems, if you would, or applications that might be interacting with each other or talking to each other or what have you. So when then your event modeling session happens, does it happen kind of through what you were explaining to me with the conversations with business side, or does it happen after you define what is the architecture is going to be like?
Um, well, it depends. I'm going to answer.
I love that answer. I
Yeah,
was I have to make a parenthesis here. I was talking to one of my colleagues yesterday who's not on the technical side, and he asked me something and I said, "It depends." And then he just starts laughing. He goes, "Since I started working with technical folks, I've noticed this is the favorite answer I always get." Like, yes, it is. Go
yeah.
ahead.
There is not one answer to
Of
everything. It
course.
really depends on the context.
Sure.
But yeah, most of the time those are kind of intertwined. It depends on what information we need at what moment. Like we're not in a process that is let's say not elastic or not flexible.
Right.
We are trying to be as flexible as possible. So we are trying to answer the questions as they come. So that's why I'm saying it depends. Sometimes we're going to have a good view on the domain. So we're first going to have to define the architectural part, but sometimes we're going to start by actually defining the domain through event modeling. The thing is that we don't really do event modeling the way I would like us to do it,
Hmm.
but also because, well, we probably didn't need a full-fledged event modeling session either. It's most of the time been a technical part, the event modeling. At first, I started trying to integrate the product managers, the product designers, etc. But it didn't last because they didn't. I don't know how to say it, but yeah, they didn't really grasp the benefits for them. However,
Right.
we did on the technical side see the potential of this, so we kept it. Um, and the advice I would say is that, and what we didn't do, I guess, on our end, is that we didn't. We didn't help the business side increase their knowledge with those methodologies, everything that is related to domain-driven design, etc. It's not only something that is technical; it's something that needs to be understood by everyone. And as we didn't do this step, they didn't really grasp the importance of it, and so we did how we could with this.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. So, in a sense, sometimes would you say then the business side does not need to be involved? Do you think you still get the benefits as long as you have an understanding or maybe a general understanding what your model is going to be like to do this event modeling session without having, as you mentioned, maybe the product manager, the designers, and so on in that session while you're doing event modeling? Do you think that's still, I mean, it's still beneficial, of course, but do you think it still works as well? Or your
Well,
recommendation would be just teach them why it's so great and then really have them involved?
well, it's hard to answer this. Well, I do think that if you want to get the most out of this, you must have everyone on board. I think
Hmm.
we've, well, I've personally um had to go to huge lengths to try and deduce some things, etc. And I actually did part of the work that wasn't initially mine because I didn't have the people in the right place to do this. But I was
Hmm.
okay with this. Like it's not like it hurt me or what. I really love doing that. But yeah, I think it would be very much more beneficial to have everyone on board because in that case, uh, everyone understands from the starting point some aspects like the importance of the language you're going to use, the ubiquitous language, using the same terms and making yourself understood. And I mean, today in our code, we have some places where we use one term and then in the front end we use another term
Yeah.
because at some point the front end team didn't really understand everything related to
Hmm.
this,
Hmm.
and they didn't understand when or where we could switch from one term to another, and
Yeah.
they didn't understand really where the domain started and when the domain ended. And so this is the kind of small things that, well, could seem not important at first,
Yeah.
but
But then it comes back to
it
bite
comes
you.
to haunt you, yeah, because someone arrived there and say, okay, I don't understand this. Why here is it saying this and there it's saying that? Okay, well, it's a mistake. And that's actually the small technical debt that you
Yeah.
are going to carry over and that you need to
Mhm.
be careful about.
Yeah. I've been in that situation. It's not fun. And the thing, though, that sometimes we don't realize is that ubiquitous language is very important, especially when it comes to your code, because as you mentioned, we had this kind of situation as well where we had a name on one of our modules. And so a team was working on that module and another team was working on a different module. And then they decided to tweak that name just slightly. And then the front end came in and they decided to name it something entirely different. So when and we had weekly meetings, so we come back and I'm talking about this one particular name, and I'm seeing eyebrows raised, people like confused faces, and they're like, "What are you referring to?" And I said, "I'm referring to this thing," and they're like, "Oh, but the name is this in our module," and I was like, well, "Why is the name that?" Because then we had to go back to the design board and realize where the disconnect was, but then by that point, it might be a little bit too late because some modules may be interconnected with each other. You hopefully you don't want them to be very connected to each other. That's why you put them in different modules. But in the end, that technical debt might actually become something bigger and bigger as you go, and as you develop other modules around it, because then you kind of have to think about which naming. And the joke is always within developers is the naming is the hardest thing to do. Right?
Yeah.
Everything else is easy. The naming is the pain that you have to go through. But I think it is important because it makes the difference. And if somebody else comes in to your team, let's say that the front end person is no longer there or I'm no longer in the team, they have to be able to look at the code base and understand what these names are. Are they related? Are they the same thing? are they completely entirely unrelated? So that's important. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, and when you're looking at some UI in your browser, for instance, and that you're starting to work on it, and that you see like a specific field, you're going to see the name of the field that is going to be shown on your screen. And then you want to do some modification about this. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to look up the name that is on the screen. And if the name
Exactly.
that is on the screen is not the name that is in your code, well, you're going to have a bit of a harder time looking it up. Maybe
Yeah,
not that much of a harder time, but still. And this adds up in the end.
exactly. And I think what you mentioned is very valuable because going back to having everybody on board, let's say your UI UX designer wants to change something on the UI side, they have to also understand what is the naming that they have to be using on the customer side or the user side or client side, whatever it is, to be able to relay that to the back end as well. So it's important to have these conversations and have the understanding. Now, one thing you mentioned that I want to kind of go back and dive a tiny bit deeper into that, which is you mentioned, and I have been through other talks that a lot of times people say everybody in the room. So when we say everybody in the room, you talked about the product manager, the product designer. But I'm wondering, would it be helpful to say have the sales team and marketing team, for instance, as well in that room? Or do you think, in your opinion, that's not really necessary? Or do we want them there to just basically develop this language with them as well?
You do want that answer again? It depends.
Depends. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get this answer several times during this session.
Well, everything depends from what is a product manager in your team, what is a salesperson, etc. Of course, a- as long as you think that someone has some piece of information about what the business is going to be, then probably he should be in that room because he's the one that maybe is going to work with whatever you're building. Uh, then it means that maybe even your client could be in that room.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I wouldn't say the more the merrier, because you need to maybe at some point not have 200 people in the room, because this may be not really uh,
the best
efficient.
use of your
Yeah,
session. Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, you need to pick and choose the people that will bring value, and you need people from, let's say, all the levels
Yeah.
from whatever you're trying to build.
So basically, really figure out who are your stakeholders
Yeah,
and make
who
sure
are
they
the
are present.
stakeholders, and make
Mhm.
sure your stakeholders are present. Yeah.
Very good. Now let's go a little bit more into technical things. So when going into the session, let's say you have all the important people in this room with you, or on the screen if you're working like me. So um,
I am.
how do you very good. Sen. How do you then model these events, and how do you decide which events are the important ones that go into the system? Because obviously at this point you have your model figured out, you kind of have an idea of what goes into the system, what comes out of it, and so on. But how do you exactly decide which events get to be there?
I'm not sure I understand the question. That
Okay,
the,
so
the
let's say,
events you're going to build them. Well,
mhm,
you're going to
mhm,
define them in your event
mhm.
modeling session.
Right. So let me revert that a little bit. Let's say you're going to the event storming part of the event modeling, right, which is the first step. Let's put all of the events that you think need to come out of this system, or the important ones, and everybody, each stakeholder comes in, put their sticky notes there, and they say, I think this event is important because I'm trying to get this result, basically, because event is a notification, right? Something in the past. What is the in my mind, that's the important thing that needs to be there in this system, um, or rather be published by whatever commands that come in, because we start with that, right? We start with the events first, and you have, let's say, 20 people, they all write their sticky notes and they put them in there. Out of those 20 sticky notes, let's say, which ones then do you decide that actually go into the system and are the important ones? And you can say, all right, these 15 go in, these five, we can just get rid of them because they're sort of implied in other things, or they're not even necessary?
Well, I must say I haven't done big sessions where it's like a lot of people and a lot of different stickies coming up, because, as I said, most of our work has been done in the engineering team. But what I would say is that you're going to take a look at the story that you're going to build around those events once you have defined the commands, etc. And then you're going to see, I guess, the responsibility and the meaning of each event. I think the core of an event should be one responsibility, and maybe even reducing that responsibility to something even smaller at some point, to make sure that whenever you have an evolution in the future, maybe you want to add a new feature that's going to do only part of something bigger that you wanted to do before. I don't know. Let's say that you could register a new account, and to register a new account you have to give an email, first name, last name, a phone number, etc., etc. And so maybe you thought, okay, so we want to create an event that is going to be user registered, and we're going to put everything in there. But now you want to create a new event, because you have a new flow, which is you can create a user from just an email. And that just creates a user, and he receives an email right away to validate his process. But you don't need everything right away. So at that point, you're going to have, so either you have your old event and you want to keep that old event because, well, that's your user registered event. So you're going to have to modify that event to make some fields that were maybe mandatory to being optional, or you're going to have to create a new event that is maybe uh, uh, initiate registration, maybe something like this. So it depends really after that on what you actually trying to do. This is why discussing things with everyone is important. But this is also why um, the what you put in your event is quite important. So when you go through this, we tend to say, okay, maybe this is the core part of the event that is really important, and this is some additional information. Let's not do one event, let's do two events with this.
Okay. Hmm.
And so we tend to rather split events into smaller grained if we see that it has value over time.
I'm really glad you mentioned two things, which was one was the responsibility. I really like that word. What is this event responsible for? And two, um, how you can evolve these events, because that's the question that a lot of times we get from folks who are event sourcing. Because again, events are immutable. You can't really add to them, you can't delete them, so they're going to stay. Now, yeah, I see your head a little going,
Mhm.
yeah, maybe it depends, right? So
It depends.
we do talk a lot about event evolution, and we'll go back to it a little bit. There's several ways of doing it, but what I really appreciated you saying was um, make them into smaller chunks that are easier to um, define, one, and also easier to evolve as the needs of the business change. For instance, as you were mentioning, maybe you don't need an address, maybe you just need an email address. Then you can kind of not publish that event for the address anymore. You can just deal with the one that has to do with the email address. So make them into as small events as possible. The other thing is we do have actually a feature that's coming up this year, which is the event transformation, but that's used a little bit for different use cases we are talking about. So I want to go back to your it depends for the event evolution. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, in any case, you shouldn't rely on modifying your events, even if it's going to be possible. It means rewriting your history. So it it's taking a lot of risks doing so. So as long as you can avoid it, you probably should be avoiding it. But there are some cases where it's going to be much simpler. However, not everyone should be able to do this. It's not your typical developer that is going to say, okay, for this new version, I'm going to change the whole event flow. No, he shouldn't be able to do that. But so this is why I'm saying it depends. It's we obviously have some cases where it may be needed just to remove some technical debt, because as you're going to build on events, as you're going to do mistakes while building them, because, well, it's a sad thing, but I guess you're bound to do some errors at some point. So you're going to work then with upcasters, for instance, to be able to upcast your event to some new event. And maybe you're going to have multiple upcasters, etc. And so maybe it's at some point it could become something quite big. Maybe also you're going to have some parts of the code that are going to depend on the value being there or not, because for some reason the model evolves at some point. And all this, well, you can benefit from event transformation at some point to clean up, but this needs to be done like in a perfectly safe environment. And by that, I mean, like, if it's been working up till now with your upcasters, well, why not just apply your upcasters and rewrite the history based on that? But yeah, avoid doing this. And I think what someone should be focusing, who wants to work with this, should be focusing on is he should be making sure that his events are going to be sustainable on the long term.
Yeah. So on that note, a couple of questions. So, what would you say are the best practices when you are building your events, or an event for that matter? And then, how do you then make sure you're not going to break implementation of another service that is listening to these events?
Well, Um, the first thing is what I said earlier: is make small chunks, make smaller events, make sure that only one event has the responsibility of doing something specific. For instance, if at some point someone is interested, I don't know, by the telephone number of a user, he should be looking at one event. If he needs to look at different events for the number being changed, then it can lead to some hardship. However, it's sometimes interesting to have multiple events to change something if you want to give meaning to what is going to be changed. Like, is it just some correction of that phone number? There was an error, or is the phone number changing? And so in that case, like for instance, let's say you were working with I don't know, phone number set, let's say, event, and at some point you allow to change that phone number, and so you create a phone number changed event. Now someone is listening to that phone number set and that phone number change event, and you decide to add a new event. Do you want to add a new action that leads to the number changing? Do you want to reuse that event, which is going to make things easy for anyone who is integrated with that? Or do you want to create a new event that people are going to have to listen to if they want to be consistent with the latest value? So this is a question you should be asking yourself. And I know that on our end, we tend to do events as small as possible, maybe with only one field or two fields in it, just with a small responsibility, so that listening to something is quite easy, mostly for updates. And generally, you have two events to listen to. The initial event that is produced when you do the creation, and another event maybe in the future whenever you want to change that value. But in some case, right at the time that we are registering a new aggregate, let's say, and providing some fields. Right at that point, we are setting some fields in a separate event just to have this apart from the rest right from the beginning. So this makes things easier for anyone who is integrated with this.
Yeah, makes sense. Which I'll come back to the integration part in just a moment. But one question in between. So now we're focusing a lot on the events, which makes sense because we were event modeling. But these events are published by commands. So do the commands have to basically follow the same rules as the events?
No, they don't actually. The events are something that is going to be immutable. Although we said that, maybe we can in some
Yeah.
specific context,
Yeah.
but let's forget we said that.
You
Um,
can't change them. No.
no, you can't change it. It's not the same with commands because commands are not something that is written in stone. Like
Yeah.
you can change them. You probably when you want to migrate your system, you're going to keep your old commands, create new commands, wait for everyone to move from your old commands to your new commands, and then you can remove your old commands. So obviously there are still some rules to not break an existing command. Like if you make something mandatory in a command that didn't have a field mandatory, then it's going to break the integration with anyone who's currently working with that command. So you should make sure that they are compatible with anything that is existing. But the thing is, with commands, you can create as much new commands as you want, because it's easy to then remove the old ones.
Right, right. Makes sense. So going back into the topic of sort of events communicating with various modules, how do you define the boundaries between your various modules? And maybe even prior to that, when do you decide to create a new module versus an application? Can you make that definition? Let's maybe talk first. What is a module? What is an application? How do you
Yeah.
define the two first? And then how do you define then the boundaries within those modules?
Well, from our point of view, an application is handling a whole domain, okay,
Hmm.
or it could actually handle multiple. We have the case where, well, our first application was actually handling multiple domains. It was our first try, so we did this like that. It was let's say, the most sound way to start with event sourcing. But our latest applications are focusing on a specific domain, and they are going to contain multiple modules. Generally, we're going to have a command module. We are going to have maybe some metrics module, sometimes a query module. It really depends on what we need. And of course, we have an API module. So a module like I'm talking about a Java Maven project, it's going to be a sub module inside the project. So you have a parent project, and then you have modules in there, each where they with their different dependencies. And so, yeah, we tend to split modules depending. Well, it's actually still evolving because, well, we've done things some way, and then we're seeing the limits of the ways that we use, and we have new ideas. So if I had to talk about what we currently have, is generally we had a command module, we had a query module, we had an ops module, an API module, and a metrics module.
Okay.
And in the command module, we would have all the aggregates and all the process managers that would handle the business logic.
Okay.
So this allows us to go inside that module and know that everything related to the business logic is in there.
Mhm.
Of course, the API, the events, the commands are in the specific API module, except those that are specifically internal. So things you don't want to expose.
Right.
Obviously, all events are exposed in some way, but from an
Mhm.
API point of view, you can kind of hide them. It doesn't make them inaccessible, but it just tells the user you shouldn't be using these
Okay.
because they are
They're just
or
internal events.
internal. Yeah.
Yep.
And one thing that I think we would benefit from is moving the process managers into their own module,
Hmm.
uh, because Well, each module is going to be deployed in a different instance, maybe multiple instances. And so separating the aggregate and the command handling from your process managers um, is a good idea, because generally you're going to need um uh, different performances on each of these. And so you're going to scale them differently depending on the use you have of your application. One other thing that we are mostly parting from is the query module, actually. Not in every project, but in a deep project, let's say, projects that are deeper in our architecture, that are not client facing, we are going to not have a query module. We initially had one because we were like creating a database and exposing everything through that query module. But then we were like, okay, but if anyone is interested in that domain, shouldn't he be listening to the events rather than doing
Right.
some kind of query?
Query, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the query module is not in our latest application.
Nice.
We completely removed it.
Mhm.
And we're like, well, you're interested in this, listen to the events and build your own projection depending on what you need,
Right.
rather than us exposing. So I would say that if we had a query module that remained somewhere, it would be maybe to expose something that is not Axon related.
Mhm.
Like maybe you have some metrics that are in an external database,
Right.
because you're
Using a
probably
third
not
party. Yeah.
using
Yeah.
third party. So in this sense, using the queries to access this is a good idea, because you use the same technology and you benefit from the technology allowing you to communicate
Yeah. With a database.
with the database.
Makes sense. Right. Awesome. So we did talk about all of the business value that, of course, event sourcing and event modeling as well bring into the picture. So the first step is, as you mentioned, you have to understand what the business problem is, which with that you do have to have a lot of communication with the business side of your company project, what have you. Now, if business requirements change, of course, and I like that you kind of defined these different modules as so on the command side, you're dealing with business logic. Now, if those change, then I'm assuming the only module you basically have to touch would be in this example that you gave would be your command side. You can just go ahead and make your modifications there and then produce the events that are actually necessary from there on. um, Anything else that you have to kind of consider when it comes to the business benefits through these processes that we talked about?
Um, well, I would say it's a completely different approach from a classical approach using event sourcing. Um, Nowadays, I kind of don't see someone creating an application that he wants to last for many years without using this kind of technology. Um, More than let's say making some things easier to build and allowing yourself to go backward in a history, etc. It also provides you immense capabilities for decoupling, splitting things, and it actually brings this by design, because if you don't do that, then it's going to, well, you're not going to be able to code anything. You need to decouple things by design. So nowadays, when I'm thinking to a whole architecture, I'm thinking about different modules, and I think about these carrying event modeling within them, event sourcing within them. Sorry, and and then I can completely imagine removing one, replacing it with some other module. It allows you to ease communication between everything, and so this, from a business perspective, is really interesting, because whatever you're going to build is going to bring you value that is going to last in time. And you know that things are always changing in a company. You are always rerouting your decision, changing strategy. If you build small modules that have a specific responsibility, well, it's actually our case. We can reuse those modules for some other parts of the application. So this is something that, well, you're not going to throw something away. You're, well, or if you do, it's because you actually don't need it anymore. So yeah, it's extremely valuable to make sure that your business is sustainable, maintainable, and that you're going to make your platform evolve in time. That's, yeah, that's the
That's
core of
also,
it.
and when we talk about business, I'm really happy you talked about sustainability, because that's something that may not be at the forefront of our decision making at the time when you're starting to build a system, but it's there at all times, because obviously you don't want to go back and rewrite everything. And sometimes the systems you're working with are quite old. They're several decades old, and you don't want to throw everything away. You want to build on it, or you want to evolve that. And thinking about what to come in the next several years or decade or what have you is important, because there's a there was a show my kids were watching. They were talking about recycling, and we always kind of sing it along as we do. It's kind of like green coding in a way, right? Because
Yeah,
you reuse, reduce, recycle, and so you're using this, and you have this motto, which is great, because not only the business benefits from less waste, code waste in this case, it's also building a stronger foundation to move forward as you
yeah.
go in the future and things are changing.
It's fun you're talking about this because I've been using the term green code more and more with my colleagues, and I didn't hear it like anywhere. It just came up because we talk about green things everywhere now, you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's this. It gives you less code lines. It's a bit more complex in some ways, but all in all, you're going to benefit from it on the long term. And it's really hard to see upfront, I think.
Hmm. Yeah.
There is maybe one thing from, let's say, more a philosophical perspective
Hmm.
that I've learned recently. It's, you know, when I was young, I was always listening to what my let's say parents were saying, what the adults were saying,
Yeah.
like you should do this, you should be careful to that. Now it's like, yeah, you're just old. Stop talking
You're
to
just
me about
old. What do
this.
you know?
Yeah, and it's and nowadays, like I understand some things like, okay, this is what at some point someone was trying to tell me, and I feel like I've had this same experience with development, you know,
Right.
because at some point someone tells you, you know, this is very important, and you're like, what? It's going to take me so
Whatever.
much time, whatever. But then you work for a couple years, then a bit more, and you're like, oh man,
Yeah.
this guy, he was
They
right.
knew what they were talking about, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
It's I tend to, I have small kids, so I tend to compare things with a lot of my experience as a parent, as I'm going through this journey with them, and as they're growing up. It made me laugh so hard when you said when you were a kid and you always laughed at whatever the parents and the adults were saying, because now there are times where my parents live pretty close by, so we're visiting them, and I can see my dad, especially, kind of his hand is in front of his mouth and just chuckling as I'm telling things to my kids. And my mom straight up just comes to me and like, oh, karma. What do they say about karma? Now you get it. She's like,
Yeah, now
yes,
you
I'm
get it.
sorry. But it's also, I mean, it's so useful when it comes to technology as well, because a lot of times we think that um, with software especially, things change so rapidly. The things that were sort of in style, if you would, quote unquote, 5 years ago are ancient now. You don't even want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But some things actually do matter, and do come back to haunt you or bite you in really uncomfortable places in your code. And so it's yes, you don't think about them in advance, but it's best to at least consider them from maybe the beginning, or as you go on,
Yeah.
think about, oh, what can happen? What are the edge cases that I may have to deal with in the next several years? And so that kind of, I think, makes it easier, especially in distributed systems and various modules, to understand really how you want them to connect and communicate.
Well, there is something that has, let's say, never changed in
Mhm.
technology. It's the thing that whenever you build something, you want people to be happy with whatever you built.
Right.
And so if you want this, then you will strive to do things always better.
Hmm.
And well, what is the thing that you need if you want to keep things right on the long term? It's not being the best in that technology or making sure that you use that specific pattern. No,
Yeah.
you want scalability because you want your business to grow. You want
Yeah.
maintainability because you want to be able to change parts of your system. You want evolvability to maybe remove complete parts of your system and change your strategy at some point. You want those things. You want system capabilities. So you need to enable those system capabilities, even if you don't trust that at that moment that you absolutely need this.
Yeah.
Well, think a bit about your previous projects, about how hard it was to do some things, and well, if you need it, take a leap of faith.
Yeah,
Trust in your
exactly.
peers, trust and talk about it, see how people respond to this. And yeah, I can only say go with it, because this is what is going to give you maximum capabilities, and then your work is only about having fun.
Yeah, having fun is good. We
Yeah.
always want to have fun. And that's why we spend so much time talking about designing, right? Talking about the
Yeah.
discovery part of it, because we want to go into the coding session, because the coding part is probably the easiest part, right? Because hopefully we all know what we're doing. And, if you're a great programmer, you can just go ahead and whiz through it. But that design session, the thought process that has to come first to figure out, okay, how do we want to um, really go forward with this business question that we have, with the models, how we want to define the boundaries, all of these questions that come in advance. It's best to have some answers to those questions. You may need to evolve those answers later on, as you mentioned, because a lot of times businesses change, our um, requirements change, and so on. But it is really important, and that's why we spend so much time talking about modeling, design session, talk to your business side of the company. Don't, as soon as something comes up, and say, hey, I'm going to go build this feature. Let's hold, let's push the brakes a little bit, and then come back and look at it from different perspectives and see what works best in your team for your use case.
Well, I have a specific case that happened, which is quite interesting. I worked with someone for about 2 years on the event source project.
Hmm.
He's someone really great. I really appreciate him. We became friends, and I taught him, let's say, everything I knew about
Hmm.
how to work with event sourcing, etc. And he was the kind of guy who loved jumping into code. He needed to do things.
Yeah.
And for 2 years, each time there was a project, I was like, "You did it again, man! You did it again!" And he knew it. He knew it. He was saying, "Yeah, I know. I need to work on that." And yeah, he had a hard time parting from this. And I just want to stress how important it is, because each time he recognized the mistake he had done,
Hmm.
and he was saying, "Yeah, indeed, if we had talked about this earlier, then I wouldn't have to had rework, reworked all my code, because this is
Yeah.
what happened in a lot of cases, needing to rework the code." So if you don't want to go into this, if you want to make your sprints or whatever you're using
Mhm.
efficient, do that design phase beforehand. Make sure that you know where you're going, that the terms are defined, that your, I don't know, API is properly defined, and that you're okay with whoever is going to interact with it, that this is what they are going to need. Um, Also, make sure that whenever you're going to create projections, when you're going to expose the data, you're not doing it for you. You're not doing it because you want to show what you save. No, you're doing it for someone that needs the data in a
Yeah.
specific way. So do it for him. Don't do it for yourself. Don't
Mm-hmm.
show the data if you don't need to, or if you want to do it for yourself. Well, just put it in some dirty database in some place that only you are going to look at. But don't make that database for someone
Just save it
else.
in memory.
Yeah, just save it in memory
Just
and
cache
don't bother with anything else.
it. Exactly. That's awesome. Yeah, the faster is not synonymous with better. So
Yes,
just
indeed.
take the time. Fantastic. Laurent, thank you so much for all of this wonderful information and sharing some of your pains and gains, I guess.
Yeah.
Both. I appreciate it. So you did have a talk during our conference last year,
Yeah.
and I'll dig it out and see if I'm sure I can find it, and I'll link that also to our conversation today, so that folks can go and look at it with some visuals, because you had a really great visuals in your presentation as well. So again, thanks, and I hope to talk to you soon. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Have a great day.
You too. I hope you liked my talk with Laurent. I will share his presentation from our conference last year in the notes of this podcast. Please join me next time for other amazing topics with wonderful guests. Until then, have a great time and happy coding.